How often men over 60 should train for maximum muscle growth? What the elite 5% do differently. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research tracked two groups of men over 60 following identical training programs for 16 weeks. Same exercises, same nutrition, same sleep. The only difference was training frequency. One group trained each muscle group once per week. The other trained each muscle group twice per week. At the end of 16 weeks, the twice per week group built 47% more muscle, not 10% more. 47% from the same exercises and the same diet, simply distributed differently across the week. If you have been training hard and not seeing results that match your effort, the answer may not be what you are doing. It may be how often you are doing it. Every point in this video builds directly on the last. Stay with me. Number 1, the training frequency myth. More gym days is quietly costing you muscle there. Picture this man. He is over 60, disciplined, consistent, and genuinely committed. He trains 6 days a week. He eats well, he sleeps reasonably, and yet his physique has barely changed in 2 years. He assumes the problem is effort and adds more volume. The results stay stubbornly flat. What nobody has told him, and what would immediately shift his results, is that the problem was never effort. It was frequency mismanagement, working silently against his biology every single week. After 60, the body's ability to manage training-induced stress operates on a narrower margin than it did at 35. The primary stress hormone cortisol, which rises in response to physical training, takes significantly longer to return to baseline in older men. A study from the Journal of Gerontology found that cortisol clearance following intense exercise was 35% slower in men over 60 compared to men in their 30s. When training frequency is too high, cortisol never fully clears between sessions. It accumulates, and chronically elevated cortisol does not just slow muscle building, it actively breaks down the muscle tissue you worked so hard to build. The man training 6 days per week with high intensity is not building more muscle than the man training 4 days strategically. He is systematically suppressing testosterone, elevating cortisol, and degrading the hormonal environment that muscle growth requires. More is not better after 60. Smarter is better. And the next point reveals the precise biological clock that should be governing your entire training schedule, one that most men over 60 have never been shown. Number 2, the 48-hour muscle protein synthesis window, the biological clock you need to know. Think of your muscle tissue as a construction site. A heavy training session is the demolition phase, controlled breakdown of muscle fiber that signals the body a rebuild is required. Muscle protein synthesis is the construction phase, your body laying down new protein to rebuild that fiber stronger than before. Here is what most men over 60 have never been told about that construction phase. It has a specific duration. Training again before it completes is like sending the demolition crew back in before the construction crew has finished. You end up with permanent rubble instead of a building. Research from the American Journal of Physiology established that muscle protein synthesis in men over 60 remains elevated for 48 to 72 hours following a resistance training session, compared to 24 to 36 hours in younger men. This is actually a longer construction window, more time for the muscle to rebuild before the next session disrupts it, but only if you respect the window. Train the same muscle group again before 48 hours have elapsed, and you interrupt construction mid-process. The adaptation never fully consolidates. The muscle never reaches the density and strength it was in the process of achieving. This biological fact, 48 to 72 hours of elevated muscle protein synthesis per muscle group, is the foundation upon which every intelligent training frequency decision for men over 60 should be built. Twice per week per muscle group with at least 72 hours between sessions for that specific muscle. Not once per week, which leaves the synthesis window chronically underactivated. Not consecutive days, which interrupts the window before completion. Twice per week with adequate spacing. That is the sweet spot. But here is where most men make a critical error that completely undermines this principle, and it involves a distinction most coaches never bother to explain clearly. Number 3. Muscle group frequency versus total training days. The distinction that changes everything. This single misunderstanding causes more disciplined men over 60 to get their training schedule completely wrong than almost any other concept in fitness. Training frequency for muscle growth refers to how often each individual muscle group is trained per week, not how many days you go to the gym. These are two entirely different variables, and confusing them produces either chronic undertraining or chronic overtraining, depending on which direction the mistake falls. Here is a concrete example. A man training his entire body every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday hits each muscle group 3 times per week with 48 hours between sessions. A man training chest and back Monday, legs Tuesday, shoulders and arms Wednesday, and repeating hits each muscle group approximately once every 5 to 6 days. Same total gym days. Dramatically different muscle group frequency. Dramatically different results. A meta-analysis published in Sports Medicine examining 25 studies on men over 55 found conclusively that training each muscle group twice per week produced significantly greater muscle growth than once per week training, regardless of total weekly volume. The researchers specifically noted that the frequency effect was more pronounced in older men, suggesting the aging muscle requires more frequent activation signals to maintain the anabolic momentum that younger muscles sustain more easily. The solution is an upper-lower training split performed 4 days per week. Upper body Monday and Thursday, lower body Tuesday and Friday. Wednesday and the weekend are active recovery, walking, mobility work, light stretching. This guarantees every major muscle group receives 2 training stimuli per week with a minimum of 72 hours between sessions. Simple, sustainable, scientifically validated. But there is still one invisible variable most men never factor into their frequency decisions, and it is operating inside your body every single day, whether you account for it or not. Number 4, the testosterone-cortisol ratio, the hormonal variable governing your training days. Every resistance training session produces 2 simultaneous hormonal responses. An anabolic response, acute spikes in testosterone and growth hormone promoting muscle repair, and a catabolic response, elevation of cortisol managing training stress. In a well-recovered man, the anabolic response dominates and cortisol resolves within 24 to 36 hours. The muscle builds. The body adapts in the right direction. In a man training too frequently without adequate recovery, the hormonal picture looks entirely different. A study from the journal Hormones and Behavior measured testosterone and cortisol levels in men over 60 across 3 different training frequency protocols over 8 weeks. Men training 4 days per week with adequate recovery maintained the highest testosterone to cortisol ratio throughout, the hormonal profile most conducive to muscle building. Men training 6 days per week showed progressively declining testosterone to cortisol ratios by week 4, entering a hormonal state that was actively catabolic despite the higher training volume. On your 2 upper body days, Monday and Thursday, perform barbell bench press or dumbbell press, bent over rows or seated cable rows, overhead press, and face pulls. 4 exercises, 3 to 4 sets each, 8 to 10 repetitions at a weight that makes the final 2 repetitions genuinely challenging. On your 2 lower body days, Tuesday and Friday, perform barbell squat or goblet squat, Romanian deadlift, Bulgarian split squat, and standing calf raises. Same set and rep parameters. Rest at least 48 hours between upper sessions and between lower sessions. This structure consistently keeps your testosterone to cortisol ratio in the anabolic zone, and that hormonal environment is where all meaningful muscle growth in men over 60 actually lives. Before the bonus point, drop a comment right now telling us where you are watching from and what training frequency you have been using until today. We read every single comment, and your answer helps us create better content this community every week. Bonus point, the frequency sweet spot. The exact weekly schedule science recommends. Every point in this video has been building toward one specific answer: 4 training days per week, upper-lower split. Each muscle group trained twice with a minimum of 72 hours between sessions, active recovery on non-training days, 1 complete rest day per week. That is the structure. But the elite 5% do not just follow this structure, they periodize it. Every 4 to 6 weeks, they reduce training volume by 40% for 1 strategic deload week. And every 12 weeks, they shift their repetition ranges to provide a fresh stimulus to muscle tissue that has adapted to the previous parameters. Weeks 1 through 12, primary compound work in the 4 to 8 repetition range, emphasizing mechanical tension and myofibrillar hypertrophy. Weeks 13 through 24, primary compound work in the 8 to 12 repetition range, with shorter rest periods emphasizing metabolic stress. Then return to the lower repetition range at heavier loads. The strength gain during the higher repetition phase allows greater loading in the next mechanical tension block. This cycling produces continuous adaptation without the plateau that stops most men cold within the first 6 months of a new program. A 2023 systematic review published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine analyzed training data from men over 60 who maintained muscular athletic physiques well into their 70s and 80s. The single most consistent variable was not their specific exercises, their exact nutrition, or their supplementation. It was training frequency consistency, hitting each muscle group twice per week with adequate recovery, week after week, month after month, year after year. The men still building muscle at 72 and still commanding presence at 80 are not